I want to welcome you to this morning's online Bible study. Whether you're tuning in at Twitter or Periscope at Bible Study Cam, whether you're on Facebook.com/reflective Bible study, whether you're on YouTube at The Online Preacher, or even if you're at theonlinepreacher.com/live, wherever you happen to be tuning in, whether it's one of those places or somewhere else, whether this is on live or on replay, I want to welcome you to this morning's online Bible study. And this morning, for Father's Day, we are going to be looking at the parable that I like to call the parable of the compassionate father. Most people know this parable by a different name and by a different focus character, but I believe that Jesus, when he shared this parable, he actually wanted people to focus on the Father. And so with that said, let's read this parable. It's a little bit longer than what some of the previous passages we've read and parables we've read, but this parable is powerful. So this is Luke chapter 15. We're going to start in verse 11, and I'm going to read from the New American Standard Bible. And this is Jesus, said, "A man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me.' So he," and this is the father, "divided his wealth between them. And not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey into a distant country. And there he squandered his estate with loose living. Now, when he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating, and no one was giving anything to him. But when he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread? But I am dying here with hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. So make me as one of your hired men.' So he got up and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion for him, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to his father, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf, kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. And he summoned one of the servants and began inquiring what these things could be. And he said to him, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound.' But he became angry and was not willing to go in. And his father came out and began pleading with him. But he answered and said to his father, 'Look, for so many years I have been serving you, and I have never neglected a command of yours. And yet you have never given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your wealth with prostitutes, you kill the fattened calf for him?' And he," and this is the father, "said to him, the older son, 'Son, you have always been with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, for this brother of yours was dead and has begun to live, and was lost and has been found.'" Now, this parable is amazing in my mind. In this parable, most people refer to as the parable of the prodigal son, focusing in on that son who, for all intents and purposes, insults his father with the most extreme sort of insult you could have in that era. I want my half of the estate. I don't care. I kind of would prefer to have my half of the estate because and I don't want to have to wait for you to die to get it. That's basically what he's saying. And this father was willing to divide everything and give the younger son what he wanted. And while this parable follows at least a little bit along the path of the younger son, as the younger son travels abroad and goes to a distant land and squanders all of this wealth, the parable really centers on the father. And Jesus draws our attention to this when he opens the parable. Most often when Jesus starts a parable, he draws our attention onto who he would want us to focus in on. And in this parable, it begins, a man had 2 sons. The focus is on the father. And that is incredible to think about, because as we step through this parable, we discover that the father is one of the most compassionate individuals that we could ever imagine. First off, the younger son insults the father, but the father has enough compassion to say, sure, I'll divide up the estate. I'll give you what you would technically get. And he allows it to happen. He is compassionate. It's not in the younger son's best interest, but he is compassionate. And then, when the younger son comes to his senses, he decides the world has basically matured him. He starts out this parable very immature, but the world has matured him, and he comes back, just hoping to be the lowest level of a hired servant. Maybe 15 or 20 steps removed from the father. But the father is more interested in having his son back. And that's compassion. The son starts with the son starts with the little planned and pre-rehearsed message that he wanted to give to his father. But the father's more interested in celebrating. And with the older son, we see the older son have maybe a sliver more maturity at the beginning of the parable, but the older son has not matured in the area of gratitude and in the area of gratefulness, in the area of relationships. The older son, you could say, is still a little bit on this, has a competitive edge. And the older son is, you could say, miles and miles ahead if you were considering the 2 sons on a race. The older son was going to inherit everything the father had because the younger son got what was due to him, and then he went and squandered it. But the father in this, he wants his family back together. He wants his 2 sons to celebrate with him together that the younger son is back. But the older son is not interested. Now, I've heard some people speculate that they would want there to be a 3rd son, a son that is in there celebrating with the younger son, but it's not as offensive to the father as the younger son had been. But I don't believe that to be the focus. Instead, I see these 2 sons as 2 extremes, and the focus being on how the father interacts and loves each of these 2 sons when both of these sons have let him down. And that's incredible to think about, because in our lives today, we let God down. We don't do the right thing. We often don't say the right thing. We just mess things up. We've failed on God's ideal plan so many times that I think he's run out of letters. But Jesus, through this parable, draws our attention onto the Father and how the Father has compassion for his very different, very extreme, and at times very immature sons. And that's amazing. And so for Father's Day today, while we are celebrating fathers, let's remember God the Father and how this parable draws us to understand his love and compassion for each and every one of us. And so thank you for tuning in this morning on this Father's Day morning. And whether you're tuning in at Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, wherever you happen to be, jump into the comments and just let me know just what you thought. If I missed sharing something that you want to draw my attention to in this passage, then share it. If you were impressed by something that I shared, then I would be delighted to know. And as we move through Father's Day together, celebrating fathers, let's still remember to keep our focus on Jesus, on God the Father, and on the new heaven and new earth and new life he is creating for us. And so with that said, thank you for tuning in. Happy Father's Day. Go celebrate some fathers in your lives. And I'll see you tomorrow.